I think we're going to get started now. My name is Diana Galprin. I'm here with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, working in the Russia-Eurasia program. And we're very excited to have this meeting here today with Marilyn Cade, who I'm sure the entire room knows, and also our virtual audience. I want to say hello and thank you to the Internet Society for hooking up the webcast system for us. So we have Marilyn Cade here today, who's the Chief Catalyst for the IGF. And we're going to be talking about the implications of WCIT after the kind of drama-free, the dramatic turn of events, and talking about all the implications that there are for internet and internet governance coming afterwards. Thank you, Marilyn.
Whoops. Let me join Diane in welcoming you and thank the Carnegie Endowment for hosting us today, and also thank the ISOC for providing the webcast. We have a number of people on the phone, and we are going to go around the room and introduce ourselves in a few minutes, but I'd like to set the stage for what we're going to do today. We are not going to be analyzing the results of the WCIT treaty itself. There have been two events this week that have focused on what the treaty outcome is, and I am more than happy to talk to any of you in detail about the perceptions and actualities of what ended up in the treaty. But what happened in the lead up to the WCIT, and I should decode that, the World Conference on International Telecommunications, what happened in the lead up to the WCIT was for 2 years of preparatory processes and a significant amount of information and discussion about internet governance issues. The position that IGF-USA took in our discussions about where internet governance issues should be discussed over the 4 years that we have been meeting together has been that those discussions belong at the Internet Governance Fora and other similar multi-stakeholder situations and fora. So today we're going to hear a number of the participants at the WCIT in Dubai are on the steering group of the IGF-USA. We're going to hear from them some of the learning and messages that they heard during the 2-week conference and in the preparatory process that are about internet governance issues, and then try to also understand what is that call to action for the multi-stakeholder community to meet those questions and those concerns, and what does that mean for the Internet Governance Forum itself, and what does it mean for IGF-USA? What I'm going to do today is invite Ambassador Vavier to make comments. We will be joined by Fiona Alexander in a few minutes, and she will be staying with us for the conference for the extent of our meeting. And I think in order to kick this off, we're going to go first of all to Ambassador Vavier and hear his comments, and then we will pause and do a round robin of introductions after his comments, since he's going to have to slip out at 10:15, and I want to take advantage of his being with us. May I turn to you, Ambassador Vavier?
Well, Marilyn, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Carnegie for hosting this, and it's very good to be with a large number of friends, many of whom, as it turns out, served on our delegation in Dubai. Let me give you kind of my perspective on what the consequences of Dubai are. It seems to me that one of the longer-term consequences can be found in the narratives that are now developing over the conference itself. That is, the effort to explain in a kind of rational, coherent way what occurred, why it occurred, and why the various nations decided either to sign the treaty text or not. There's a very important narrative that has developed in many places where countries did sign the text that says something like the following. The Western world, especially the United States, came to Dubai intent on continuing its absolute control over the internet and its mechanisms, And this is the thing that eventually led to the conference having the rather dramatic split that it did. That we in the West were either exceptionally fastidious about the treaty provisions and therefore declined to sign them, or that we never intended to negotiate in good faith because the internet governance arrangements that exist today are very much to our liking, and we're very disinclined to see them in any way compromised. Now, what is the consequence of this narrative? And I should say there's a rather strong counter-narrative that is developing in the West that focuses on the internet freedom agenda, the notion that both the rights-based and economics-based cases for internet freedom are things that need to be very zealously protected and preserved. But let's look at the narrative that came to some considerable extent from the developing world. What I think it means is this. We have to find ways to enable much greater developing world participation in the multi-stakeholder arrangements that have grown up around internet governance in terms of all of the specialized institutions that have grown up. Now, all of them, as far as I know, are in fact welcoming. It's not that anybody is excluded or shut out, but there are obviously income constraints, there are cultural complexities, there are a whole range of things that make these specialized institutions less congenial for people from the developing world than they are for people from the developed world. And I think as much as anything else, one of the consequences of Dubai is that we have to find improved ways to make these organizations in practice, just as they are in theory, but in practice more inclusive.
Thank you, Phil. I think, going to take the opportunity to maybe pose one further question to you. You've attended now a few of the, you've spoken at the IGF-USA, but you also attended the Internet Governance Forum for the past few years. And I wondered if you might just comment about your observation about the potential. I know we have a representative, a colleague from the Azerbaijan embassy here with us today. We were hosted in Azerbaijan just this year, and I wondered if you might say a few words about your maybe expectations or vision for how the IGF can be more useful and meaningful to developing countries from what you've seen of it.
Well, first, I think it needs to be said that the IGF itself has seemed to me to be a very, very successful activity. That the discussions that I've been able to participate in, the workshops, have been very well organized. If anything, I think my sense of disappointment is that they seem too short. That you get quite interesting discussions going among experts from lots of different perspectives, and then it's time to move on to the next thing rather quickly. The one thing that has occurred to me that would be useful in terms of IGF improvements would be to find a way to, again, encourage more participation from those who are coming from the developing world. To try to see if there aren't ways that we could make some of what occurs there immediately practical from the standpoint of those who would attend. And the thought that I've had, and we've made kind of an effort at it that I don't think, frankly, enjoyed any success, but the thought I'd had was to see if we couldn't arrange for leading experts to be available to offer, let's say, a one-day session of one form or another of technical assistance in terms of subject matters that are important to the developing world, with the following, with the included commitment that the experts would remain for another couple of days or so available for consultations with individual individuals who might attend. There are a whole range of subject matters that we know are of enormous importance to the developing world. Obviously things like ways to improve broadband deployment, ways to make better use of universal service funds that many countries have that they don't actually deploy for reasons having to do with technical limitations. Cybersecurity turns out to be an increasingly significant issue for our friends in the developing world as they get more broadband connectivity. But a whole range of subject matters like that. And if we could find ways, at least in my view, to make technical experts available, try to make these sessions that would give some immediate practical advantage to those who attend, we might be able to induce more attendance from the developing world.
Thank you. I'm going to ask whoever is on the phone that is taking such fast notes to mute your phone so that we're not able to follow your typing. And we'll all try to speak directly into the microphone because I want to be sure we are being webcast. Let me do this quickly. I think it would be good if we could now go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then we'll take a couple of questions for Ambassador Vavier. And let me start, if you don't mind, Jake, we'll start with the folks who are in the back of the room, and then we'll go to the start with Andy, and then we'll go to the phone bridge, and then we'll come to the room. Andy.
Sure. Thanks, Marilyn. Andrew Mack, AM Global Consulting.
Hi, Shane Hughes.
Craig Riley, U.S. State Department.
Leonid Tisicny, Researcher, Global Affairs.
Good morning. I'm Chris Hemmerlein from NTIA, and I just wanted to say on behalf of Fiona Alexander, she had a loss in the family last night, unfortunately, so she'll be unable to be with us.
Chris, thank you, and we'll send our sympathies to her.
Sabina Sadiglik from the Embassy of Azerbaijan.
Lawrence, State Department.
David Viorst, ISOC, DC.
Shmi Ranganath, Public Knowledge.
Anthony Abbott, National Endowment for Democracy.
I'm Seth Bouvier. I work at the State Department and the Human Rights Bureau.
Judith Hellestein, Hellestein Associates and ISOC DC.
Mike Nelson, I cover tech policy for Bloomberg Government, and I also teach at Georgetown.
Meg Gaydosic with USAID.
Dan O'Neill with the Global Information Infrastructure Commission.
Harold Feld with Public Knowledge.
Pablo Molina, I teach at Georgetown.
Clovis Baptiste, Inter-American Telecommunications Commission.
Urbany Associates.
Andrew Reynolds, Department of State.
Hiram Borisova, Verisign.
Bob Hershey, Consultant.
Chip Sharp, Cisco Systems.
Pam Covington, Verisign.
Barbara Warner, U.S. Counsel for International Business.
And let's go to the phone bridge.
Dan Bart, Valley View.
Becky Burr, New Star.
Jonathan Zook, the Association for Competitive Technology.
Anyone else?
David McCauley with Bloomberg BNA.
Okay. What I'd like to do is, first of all, open the floor to any questions that anyone wants to ask Ambassador Vavier, and then we will start with the roundtable discussion. But I do want to offer those of you who were not in Dubai the opportunity to maybe raise any questions with Ambassador Vavier while he is still with us. The risk is that I'll ask the questions unless you do. Andy, I think there's a microphone there for you.
Thanks, Ambassador Vavier. You mentioned one of the opportunities being to try to get more participation from people from the Global South. any particular kind of people from the Global South you'd really like to reach out to? We've talked a lot about trying to get people from the private sector as well. And do you think that the way that things are structured, there are adequate opportunities for them to actually get to the microphone, to get on the stage, to be seen and be heard?
Well, I really have in mind essentially all elements of society that are interested in the internet. We have there are obviously some scholarships. There are some financial aids available for people to attend the IGF, but I'd like to see a lot more of it. And we would like to find ways to, frankly, to get more senior government officials to attend from around the world. I think those who do attend find it a very instructive experience in terms of the broad range of interest and really committed interest in the internet and in its future. And that sort of thing is, in my view, likely to be, among other things, highly instructive in terms of what I think is essentially the critical public policy issue here, which is to keep all of this in a multi-stakeholder environment. But the secret ingredient, I think, in all of this is money, and it's going to be, frankly, I think, hard to come by in terms of at least Western governments, probably harder and harder the next few years because of budgetary constraints.
Just to follow up on that, Phil, it's Mike Nelson. For the cost of doing the WCIT, we could have had perhaps 500 or even 1,000 small virtual sessions with the kind of experts you're talking about, talking to some very senior people in these countries. And it seems to me that we're not using the technology well enough. I know if you invited the telecom ministers of 20 countries to meet with Vince Cerf for 2 hours to talk about IPv6 and then to meet with a spam expert on some similar issues, they'd jump at the opportunity, both to hear from the expert, but also to hear from each other. And instead we keep doing these grand meetings where everybody has to fly away for 2 weeks and spend $5,000 or $10,000 each. Why aren't we doing that?
Well, I guess, Mike, my view is we are making progress on some of these things. And again, the budgetary constraints I just mentioned are going to, I think, compel more progress along these lines. Any of you have ever had the experience of a conference using telepresence or equivalent kinds of video conferencing activities realize that there's absolutely no reason, if something like that's available, for people to fly a long ways to have a 2 or 3 or 4 hour meeting. But just to engage in the optimism that is supposed to be characteristic of those in the diplomacy business, it is the case that the plenary sessions of the WCIT were webcast. They were obviously followed by a good many people around the world, and the combination of the webcasting and the closed captioning, I think, has expanded. It's one of these things where technology has enabled many more people to be aware of at least some of what goes on at these conferences.
Well, I think the IGF has produced some great content, but Nelson's rule of government is the more important the decision, the less informed the person making it, and the busier they are. And so if we need to get those very busy telecom ministers and perhaps even economics ministers and perhaps even prime ministers to devote 2 or 3 hours to some of these issues. And they're not going to fly to Baku. They're not going to spend a lot of time on internet because they've got 50 other issues to cover. But if you were able to promise them, really targeted, highest quality discussion where they'd have a two-way conversation, I think they'd do it, and they'd do it on Google Hangout if necessary.
So, Mike, I'm going to, it's Marilyn, I'm going to intervene with a comment that's been shared on one of the lists about the reliance just on virtual communication. And the comment was about how certain cultures strongly prefer to interact face-to-face. And I see Andy nodding. I think that's been the experience that I'm finding in working with some of the countries my experience is that you can build on face-to-face with follow-up with teleconferences and webcast, but that very often the initial engagement needs to be directed toward what is comfortable to that particular culture. I've asked Clovis to speak a little bit later about his experience in working with the CITEL countries, and I would like to come back to this question because I think Mike has posed an interesting question, and that is, how do we augment? But Ambassador Vavier made a point that I want to draw out, and that is today, the target for invitations to the IGF does not include the regulators. We're very fortunate at IGF-USA because we have 5 active participants on the steering group from the FCC. And in Europe, Eurodig also has representatives from the regulatory parties. But when you look at the rest of the national and regional IGFs, there is not a welcoming space. The focus up to now in the 7 short years of the IGF has been the ministries of economic development or science and technology. So one takeaway, Phil, that I might posit that I really learned about in Dubai, I met with a number of the delegations. And by the way, many of those delegations were multi-stakeholder, and some of the delegations changed their constituencies driven by a national IGF initiative. Nigeria is an example that when they held their national IGF initiative, the consensus of the participants was to ask the minister to add multi-stakeholder participants to the Nigerian delegation. There were 87 people on the Nigerian delegation, about 45 of whom did travel and others followed remotely, and it was a very diverse group. So what I'm going to take away from, Phil, from your comment is we need to be looking at the IGF and thinking about how to make it more meaningful and more tactically responsible and responsive in terms of answering questions. And some of what I'd like to do in hearing from the participants is, what are the issues that really came out to you in participating in the IGF that are clearly in the realm of Internet governance that we could do more about through the Internet Governance Forum? So I don't want to, I know you've got to leave, but we have time maybe for one more question. Let me go to the microphone and see if there's anyone who wants to ask Ambassador Vavier a question.
To the telephone, you mean?
To the telephone?
I was just wondering, sorry, about, I had a process question actually about the way that the treaty summit went. My understanding was that it was a much more open process this time and transparent in terms of the documents being posted online and some of the discussions being webcast. I was just wondering, in terms of the takeaways from the lessons from that, is this a process that you found was useful overall and should be continued on? Or is there more room for kind of first closed-door discussions before broadening out the dialogue?
Well, it is true that in various ways, all the documents that were contributed to the conference were made available. We did it through the State Department in a kind of ad hoc way that almost certainly from a technical perspective could be improved, but we felt, and Terry Kramer, Ambassador, felt very strongly that he wanted this to be as transparent as possible, and that then led both to the documents being available and to the ITAC process, which is an open Federal Advisory Committee process to be kept open beyond the time when it would normally have been discontinued. I think the way to understand this is part of, and it's at the very beginning of something that we're going to see more and more of, because the internet basically enables much more participation, much more a much greater ability on the part of anybody who's interested to know what's going on, to be able to contribute thoughts and ideas and so forth about it. My guess is that over some probably relatively compressed time frame as against the history of the world, probably over the next 5, 10, 20 years, we will figure out ways to make maximum use of citizen participation or full participation in these kinds of activities. And that's not to say realistically that everything will be out in the open, that all will be negotiated in full view with anybody and everybody who happens to have a connection able to express an opinion. Some of it, without a doubt, is going to continue to be done in private. But I do think the transparency aspects of it are going to become vastly more the norm than they are today. And our experience was kind of an effort of, I don't know if it was literally the first effort of this kind, but close to the first effort of this kind, and we'll see a lot more of it, I think.
I'm going to, yes?
Online question whenever it's appropriate.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Okay, this question is from Jana Anderson, and I thought it was related somewhat to that last question. So she asks, from the point of view of a person with limited financial resources, of all the spring 2013 global internet meetings, let's see, conferences and discussions, which is likely the best for a highly engaged civil society member to attend and participate in?
So Jana, I'm going to, for those who are in the room, I'm going to just reel off what the meetings are. You have a handout in front of you that has the timeline. There is a WCIT plus 10 consultation in Paris for 3 days, followed by an IGF consultation, also in Paris. There's a WCIT forum event that is simultaneous with the ITU's World Telecommunications Policy Forum in May, between the 13th to the 17th of May. And then in May, the following week, there will be an IGF consultation. And I think, Jana, those are the key activities that are open and inclusive. Some of those will be webcast and will have remote participation capability. I think it's probably preliminary to forecast which is the most useful until we continue this conversation a little bit. But I will just say each of them has different dynamics. The ITU's WTPF is, it's not clear right now how open that meeting will be. The WCIT forum itself is open, but I could not really advertise that as being really an effective use of folks' time, and I'll explain more about that later. So I'm thinking that probably the WCIT plus 10 activities are going to be really important in the sense that that is a place where the voice of all stakeholders about the effectiveness of the WCIT action lines and the follow-up to the WCIT really need to be heard. And maybe we'll go through, I had planned to go through this timeline in a little bit more detail, Jana, and after we talk a little bit with others in the room, we'll come back to that. I wanted to make a comment about transparency and to acknowledge the role of civil society in really make the contribution of civil society in affecting the openness that did transpire in the ITU wicket. It was absolutely phenomenal, and this began more than a year ago, but in May of 2012, at the WCIT forum, there was a 3-hour session that I attended because I was there for the WCIT forum, and civil society, in a very professional manner, joined by members of the technical community and business and some friendly governments, called on the ITU to make the treaty negotiating documents publicly available. Initially, that was not well received. That was followed the following week at a CSTD meeting by a letter that I think somewhere around 25 or 30 civil society groups had signed on to that was presented to the Secretary General of the ITU at the CSTD, and very strong support for making those documents available came forward from many of the CSTD countries that were there. Over time, some of the member states, the Secretary General of the ITU did propose to make the documents available, and in the ITU Council, that was not supported by a number of member states. But subsequently, there was agreement to make the core negotiating document available, and then other governments, including the United States, as Ambassador Vavier said, made it a practice to make the documents available to any one of their citizens who asked for them. So that led to more openness and availability of the documents, and then the decision was taken to webcast the plenary sessions, and the key tough issues were dealt with in plenary. In the past, in meetings like this, they have typically been sent off to small negotiating groups where the discussions would not have been public. And I think this is a really major step forward. It's not complete transparency and openness and inclusiveness, but it certainly was very different from previous conferences of this nature, and particularly treaty negotiations and other meetings, Phil, that I've participated in. Did you want to say anything else about that? I think Ambassador Vavier is going to be slipping out. I am going to open this up to, I wanted to just start perhaps by asking Harold, who was a member of the U.S. delegation, is with Public Knowledge, has a colleague here with him who was also a part of the delegation, to talk a little bit about your perspective from civil society about the key issues, and the issues that you think are relevant for Internet governance that came out.
Right. So first, I need to start with what is now a standard disclaimer that although I was a advisory member of the U.S. delegation, what I'm about to say are my own opinions and do not reflect necessarily the opinions of the United States or the United States delegation. There are a couple of things. I will try to keep this brief because I know we have a lot of ground to cover, but let me start by saying I started at the beginning of the year when I heard about the concern about the ITU as a skeptic, having been around in Internet governance issues on and off for over 10 years at this point. The Internet is coming to take our the ITU is coming to take our Internet away from us has been a standard concern and fear and whispered rumor for a very long time. What I came away from the WCIT convinced that civil society really needs to be engaged in these issues at the ITU, that we need to work constructively with the ITU on culture change within the ITU to enable more civil society engagement. And I do think that there's some education that needs to take place institutionally within the ITU as to how the role of civil society is substantively different from both that of member states and of sector members. What we bring in our perspective and what our role is both within the institution and within our home countries is somewhat different. I think that what is key to understand here is that the involvement of global civil society organizations and the very strong presence of civil society, not simply from the developed North, but also in the global South, was significant and highly influential, as other people have mentioned. That was true not merely in trying to persuade other country delegations with regard to what has been called the Internet Freedom Agenda, but also with regard to influencing the United States and others with regard to the nature of civil society concerns. And to help, I think, the United States to understand what needs to be done going forward. I do think the United States gained enormous credibility with those organizations that were present both in Baku and at WCIT by demonstrating a willingness to listen, to actively listen, to explain their positions rather than simply try to sell civil society on the U.S.'s agenda, and by ultimately this being reflected in the United States' willingness to support human rights language in the preamble, which was a very significant issue for a number of civil society representatives, particularly from the Global South. I do want to add a couple of significant points. One is we talk about the Global South, but the two regions that were not represented by civil society representations at WCIT were from Russia and the Russia Consortium bloc, and from the Arab bloc. Those regions also, there are civil society organizations within those regions, and they need to be actively reached out to and encouraged to attend, particularly as one of the important functions here is to inform national delegations and also to hold national governments accountable by their civil society organizations for the positions that they take in the ITU. The other very important point that Phil Verveer mentioned, which I cannot stress enough, is there needs to be funding for this. There is, even within the United States and Europe, the ability of key civil society organizations and interested participants to participate is highly limited by funds. Public knowledge, this was an enormous investment for us in terms of our overall resources. And while we remain committed, it's very clear that for us, there are a lot of issues of how we can participate going forward, simply because we, like every other NGO in the world, has funding issues and concerns. To make a very crass appeal, industry organizations that care about the outcomes in this space, both for national legislation within those countries and in fora like the ITU, really need to start valuing the investment that they make in this space. Similarly, I think that foundations and others who care about particular issues with regard to internet governance really need to consider the high return on the investment that they get from funding in this space. The last thing I think that I need to mention is to just push back a bit on what Mike Nelson was saying earlier, which is being at WCIT made an enormous difference for the civil society representatives who were there in terms of the formation of genuine community among the civil society participants and a genuine ability to explain and understand each other's positions, and to have a united civil society bloc as a sort of meta delegation. That could not have happened through remote participation alone. This connection that was made there in Baku and in the WCIT continues to help permeate and reinforce the need for engagement and to preserve institutional knowledge, so that as these things continue to emerge and grow, we don't lose the experience that we had and the lessons that we learned. And finally, this is about culture change. This is not just about technical education to ministers. This is not about a high-level approach. If we are serious about the fundamental goals of engagement and why it is important to find genuine solutions for digital deployment and global digital divide issues, to find the proper balance of free expression while addressing genuine concerns within each of these very different countries with different economic concerns, different social concerns. We need to be making a very broad bottom-up effort and not simply concern ourselves with influencing a key decision maker within a country, but be concerned about fostering global culture change in a positive direction through continued civil society and expanded civil society involvement in the IGF.
Thank you. Harold, before I move on, though, if you were, I made a list, it's Marilyn speaking, I made a list of the issues that Ambassador Vavier referenced and added a couple to them myself. So broadband deployment, which translates into access in most of the developing countries and in the IGF itself. The effective use of USF funds to support access broadly, not just about the connectivity, but also the devices, preparation of teachers and cyber cafes, et cetera, but really to deploy the USF funds in a meaningful way. Spam, which was a topic we heard a lot about during the treaty discussion with different definitions. I have worked on this issue at the ITU, and spam comes in about 5 different flavors depending on who you're talking to. It may be email which has advertising associated with it for some countries. It may be marketing information for others. It may be content that a government prefers not to have their citizens able to receive, etc. But spam in the broad sense, the broader cyber issues, and then specifically cybersecurity. Are there other issues that you heard or that civil society heard and that you would want to add to that list of the points, the real genuine internet governance topics that were raised that governments and participants are looking for a place to deal with?
Well, yes, and keeping in mind that the civil society organizations that care deeply about this, only a fraction of those could make it to the WCIT, and a somewhat larger fraction participate remotely, but we also need to understand the challenges for people trying to participate remotely in countries where the infrastructure simply doesn't exist. There is a certain irony in telling people who have a digital divide issue that the answer is to engage more in remote participation. But the other issues that were raised were one of the comments that I found very important from one of the delegates, who I will not name, was generals in my country still occasionally talk about the need for a coup. I do not want to facilitate the ability of governments to control internet content. And one of the things we need to be cautious about is the nature of the dialogue, which in this case was about ITU as an institution, which a lot of the NGOs who are in the developing world actually view very favorably, both because of experience with the ITUD, which is the development fund. They rely extensively on the ITUT. I do think that another caution, frankly, to both NGOs and others from the developing world is to not be so arrogant about the continued value of the ITU as an institution or the value of a particular set of fora as opposed to the ITU for functions that the ITU is already doing. We need to, I think, recognize that was kind of an undercurrent of concern. Finally, there was an issue that was very important that was actually a split about this question that came up at the very end about the right of nations to have access to infrastructure, which came up at the, was actually raised throughout the conference, and then the African bloc moved to put it in at the end, and that, because it came up in the context of human rights, was very offensive to a large number of the European delegates and to a number of us from developing civil society. I think, though, that what we heard from people in the Global South when this issue was raised is there is a serious fundamental issue of concern that when a country like, say, Sudan is under sanction, and therefore they are not able to access certain international telecommunication services, that has significant impact on people. That one of the delegates from Africa said, we need this because phone cards are not working to call for families to call home in Sudan. And we need to figure out how we are going to deal with that in a way that does not allow certain nations to hijack the human rights language, but which acknowledges that there is actually a debate that is relevant within the Global South and to all of us on whether, on the nature of national access to the overall facilities.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Frank Urbany and then Chip Sharp to talk a little bit about, from a business perspective, the issues that they heard. And I also wanted to ask Chip to, and Frank, you may want to comment on this as well. During the 2 weeks, there was a particular point where we were hearing about very real issues, and we had a discussion among primarily business and a few from the technical community and government about what should we do? What is the fora? What do we need to? We need to build a new fora. Can the issues be adequately addressed in the existing fora? So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your perspective. You've, for those of you who don't know Frank, Frank has been a leading representative both on behalf of the part of government when he was with government and then industry at a number of these very serious treaty conferences. So Frank, let me ask you to lead off here and then we'll turn to Chip.
All right. Thank you, Marilyn. I'll try to be generally brief as making a few opening comments. Looking at the conference, the treaty conference in the ITU, I was struck about several things about the results. On the one hand, strong reference to internet does not appear in the body of the treaty. There is an accompanying resolution that discusses the internet and looking at it on a going forward basis. One of the things that I've come away with, though, having seen and listened to the discussion there and the various issues that do appear in the treaty, is that I think in context of impact on IGF is one of the points of our meeting here and discussion today, is I think that there will be a gravitational pull toward the ITU to do more in the internet arena, including internet governance aspects. Now, where I come out on that is that I don't believe any institution has the wherewithal, the knowledge to deal with all aspects of the internet. I think in the U.S., private sector clearly has been for a bottoms-up approach and not to have a international bureaucracy impose what's best and the direction for the internet. So I think that we will have to, we collectively, those that believe in a free internet, to be able to develop in an unfettered way, will have to be continue to be vigilant and to continue to work on this, because the parties that have a more centralized view of how the internet should be managed will continue to be active in the field. So what we have here is a result of this conference is not a definitive decision with respect to how internet will go forward. It's a step along the way. Those of you who have been involved in following this from the pre-WCIT days will realize that what we're talking about is a marathon. There's been reference here to the cultural impact that internet is having, and I think we'll see that permeate a number of organizations. I tend to be relatively optimistic with respect to the contribution that the ITU can make and will make in the internet area without it being the sole agency looking after internet matters. One of the things that I think everyone should bear in mind, that unlike many intergovernmental organizations, the private sector participates directly as of membership in the ITU, and so there is an opportunity to carry forward in future discussions views from the private sector in combination with the government. Now, I do think that one of the significant developments was at this last conference was the inclusion of greater private civil society participation. I think the webcasting and the openness is a mark of things to come. I think the trick will be is how to perpetuate that and continue that. So far as the results of WCIT, I believe there will be a reprise of some of those discussions coming up at the World Telecommunications Policy Forum. There will be a continuation of visiting the issues that were addressed or not addressed adequately in the view of some people. And looking on the horizon, because Marilyn there was a question and some reference to future events, what to participate in. I think probably another major benchmark people should keep clearly in mind is that in 2014, 2 years' time, there will be a plenipotentiary conference of the ITU. The significance of that is that is also a treaty-making conference, and therefore I do believe there will be efforts there to continue in a significant way a number of the discussions that were undertaken at WCIT, but perhaps not accomplished satisfactorily to the desires of various proponents. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Chip, I might turn to you to talk a little bit. Chip is with Cisco, and Cisco is, for those of you who are not familiar with the ITU has sector members that are primarily companies or maybe academics who are focused on the standards issues. They may be a sector member in the radio sector, in the telecommunications sector, or in the development sector, or all three. And Chip, I might turn to you to talk a little bit about your thoughts about the sort of some of the, I might call them technical aspects of the internet governance issues that did come up, and some of the discussions and views that you hold about what that means for internet governance issues and for the Internet Governance Forum itself, in terms of lots of questions about issues that many in the room were saying do not belong at the ITU, but then where do they go?
Thank you, Marilyn. I think I need to give the standard disclaimer that Harold gave on the U.S. delegation. My views here don't represent the U.S. delegation positions. And I'll go one step further and say that we've not had a chance to actually fully discuss this. We just got back from Dubai, so I can't say that my comments reflect Cisco's views on it. So take these only as my own observations. From my perspective, at 4 weeks in Dubai, so I was there for the CTO meeting, the Global Standards Symposium, and then WTSA and the WCIT. So I'm glad to be home. Or actually, I will be glad to be home when I get home. I'm actually not from here. So let me look at the short term. The effect won't be immediate. The ITRs do not go into effect until January 2015. And as I think Mr. Urbany said, there's a plenty pot between now and 2015. So if in the plenty pot they decide to change the definitions of some of the terms in the Constitution, it could actually change what the ITRs mean, once they go into effect. So it's something that we're going to need to be looking at very carefully. In terms of all the issues that were on the table, I think we were all aware that, the WCIT was not supposed to be about the internet. We weren't going to discuss internet governance. I think we found that some people had different definitions of what internet governance was. So it's kind of a vague term. It's not in terms of what it actually means to different people. But I think as we saw, there were a number of proposals going into conference that directly addressed the internet. I think most people saw the Russian proposal that wanted to put a new article into the ITRs directly addressing internet and some internet governance issues. There were some others that were indirect proposals into the conference that didn't necessarily mention internet specifically, but having participated for several years in the preparatory meetings and process, it was obvious that some of the governments intended to apply them to the internet. So in that regard, there's no text in the current treaty concerning the internet. I think some of the countries made it clear that they consider telecommunications, or they consider the internet to be part of telecommunications and fall under that definition. And so there may be some, countries wanting to apply this to the new provisions in the ITRs to things like voice over IP. So, for example, the provisions that are in the ITRs on calling party number delivery and misuse of calling party number and misuse of resources. I think in some of the preparatory meetings, some of the country representatives made it clear that they wanted to apply that to voice over IP. So we can kind of look forward and watch to see how that plays out in some of these areas. And we're concerned, again, about, I think Marilyn already mentioned spam. There's a provision there on electronic, bulk electronic communication. So we'll have to see, although spam is not mentioned anywhere in there, and content, there's a text in the, I think, Article 1 that was added saying these treaty is not about content. We'll have to see how that is applied, in the real world. There's text in there on minimum QoS, and there was text in the previous, in 1988 ITRs, already mentioning quality of service, and I'll say that's in small caps, right? Not small caps, but lowercase, not uppercase QoS. So there is no additional real text in there on quality of service specifically aimed at internet traffic. We'll need to see how that is actually applied in practice. As far as the industry is concerned, one of the things that we were concerned about already, we're discussing internally is, we do business across the, multinational corporation. We sell equipment in all countries, well, not all countries, but as many countries as we're allowed to. And we're going to have to be working with many of these countries. We're going to have to work with both the signatory countries and the non-signatory countries. So we were, as a business, will have to start analyzing what does this mean to us, as a company, as a business, when we have to work across these boundaries. And we're going to have to continue working with these governments and with these organizations and countries that signed the treaty. And I think a lot of the providers are going to have to look at that as well. The multinationals, over-the-top providers are going to have to look at how their business is going to be affected when crossing these boundaries. I think also there was I'm not sure I've heard it mentioned, I think Ambassador Vavier, I kind of referenced it a little bit, is I think we're going to need to do a lot of work in healing, because I think there was some, hard feelings, after this conference. I think a lot of countries felt, I don't know, I won't put words in their mouth, but they didn't feel very good toward the non-signatories at the end of this conference, some of the signatory countries. And I think someone mentioned that some countries felt that the U.S. went in with no intention of signing the treaty, no matter what happened. I can say personally that I spent a lot of time trying to get this thing, and personally, 4 weeks, 15-hour days, trying to get something in shape where we could actually, everyone could agree to. And I thought we were really close at the end, but not quite close enough. In terms of issues going forward, I think Mr. Urbany mentioned it. I think several people mentioned these things aren't going away. These issues like address allocation, resource allocation, who allocates IP addresses, who manages the internet resources. These things have been discussed for 10 years in ITU context and in these intergovernmental contexts. And I don't see that they're going to stop being discussed. And I think we all know there are many countries who don't like the idea that ICANN is under contract with the Department of Commerce. And that's not going away because internet's not in this treaty. So we're going to be addressing this issue at every conference and every venue, probably as long as I'm, working, I can imagine. So, we just need to be ready and say this is a process, it's a long-term process, and we will need to continue on with that. IGF, internet governance issues. One thing that struck me is interesting is some of the developing countries, they talk about how they need to engage more with the internet governance process. They don't, it needs to be more friendly to them, more available to them. And I think there's some education there as well and some knowledge because, for example, the African countries, in one country say this, and I think, well, AFRINIC is in Africa, right? It's an African organization run by Africans. So maybe they need to figure out some way of engaging, bringing these people into AFRINIC a little bit better. AFRINIC even has a governmental roundtable that they sponsor for actually bringing governments in and discussing issues related to internet governance within the African region. So we need to figure out how to get them in touch with their regional organizations as well. Let's see, there's also network operating groups that are active. There are many in Africa. There's AFNOG, but some of the countries have their own. And some of the regulators and others that I spoke to in those countries were not necessarily even aware that their country had a network operators group and were not engaging with it. So, figure out how do we get the regulators and the people who are at the WCIT to actually engage with their own communities within their countries. Because, right, all politics are local, right? I think we've already learned that. In terms of IGF itself, did you want me to summarize this paper, or would you like me to stop there?
Why don't you stop there, and we'll come back to that paper in a few minutes. Thank you.
And one thing that I just want to, and it was apparent to me, I think it's been mentioned before, but I'll stress it a little bit, is in the 4 weeks I was there, and they're working with the governments, there is a fundamental divide in philosophy between market-led economies and government-led economies. I mean, that's, this goes beyond the internet and beyond internet governance, but it does reflect back into this discussion. And again, that's kind of bigger than the internet, I think, going forward. Thank you, Marilyn.
Jim, I think that's a really important point. If I might go to Chris, to you, to ask you to maybe join us and offer some comments on behalf of NTIA. I think you were also spending a major part of your life in Dubai.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I guess I should probably issue the same caveat as well, that only speaking for myself, not necessarily for NTIA or the U.S. delegation, and was not planning on speaking at all today in the absence of Fiona, so take an even larger grain of salt with what I might have to say this morning. But I guess what I'd first like to say, I think only the most cynical amongst us would say they wouldn't say that they're a bit disappointed on the outcome of the WCIT. As Chip was saying, that the United States really went in with all the best intention to make a deal, to sign the new ITRs that were reflective of the telecommunications environment in the world today, that would advance the cause of so many things that are important not only to the United States but to the rest of the world as well. So it really is with a sense of disappointment, for myself at least, that we're back here without a deal that the whole world was able to agree to. With that being said, though, I think our consolation is that, at least as far as we're considered, we think, and from what I understand, a lot of good response from business and civil society is that we had right on our side. We had a principled argument about what the internet needs and what the internet is what it's going to take to make it thrive, and we walked away from that, from signing the deal for the right reasons. And I really, to pick up on something that Chip said, I really don't think that any other member state has a right to be surprised on the decision that we took. I think the United States was very clear from going on the last year, 2 years, that the internet language in the ITRs was a red line. Some people might try to draw that distinction, whether it's a non-binding resolution or in the treaty text, but I think in many ways that distinction is rather inconsequential. It's a distinction without a real difference. So we made it clear that the internet was not going to be a part of this treaty. And so moving forward, I felt like sometimes in the WCIT negotiations, I could have closed my eyes and I was at the informal experts group of the WTPF again, or in some of the informal or the working group on internet public policy, whatever name it goes under now. It's the argument that we've been having, for years and years, and it's not gonna stop. Certainly not in the WTPF, certainly not in the WCIT review, or the plenipotentiary in 2014. So, and just speaking as maybe just a slight chance for an appeal from the government, we're really going to need help. Our budgets are going to be tight, so to the extent that business and civil society and the technical community can really help advance our cause, we're going to need it. It's interesting. I don't know. Chip was mentioning how Cisco is going to have to reflect on when the ITRs go into effect, how their operations might differ between countries that are signatories and countries that are not. And I'd be interested myself to see how that really comes into play. I fear in a way that might elevate the importance of the role of the ITU, or why some countries, some organizations might need to feel like their presence there is stronger or more important, since there's such an inconsistency among the countries. Maybe that's not the case, but I think they'll be interested to see. I think that's about it. Like I said, I'm kind of just speaking extemporaneously, but those are the thoughts that come to mind. So thank you very much.
Thanks, and Chris, we'll come back to, when we look at the timeline, we'll come back to decoding again in response to Jana and to others what some of those key activities are. Paul, I wanted to come to you, maybe not now, but in a few minutes, so I want to give you a heads up about that. And I'll take Iran first and then come to you, if that's okay.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Irem Borisova, I work for Verisign, but I wanted to start with the same caveat with like everybody else. I was part of the U.S. delegation in Dubai, and I understand the delegation doesn't exist anymore in that form. So, but my comments would reflect my personal impressions and the conclusions I've drawn from my experience while being part of the U.S. delegation in Dubai. So trying to not repeat a lot of what was already said, which I really agree. The main thing that became absolutely clear to me is that as much as the issue of the internet was discussed previously at the ITU for the last 10 years, as it was mentioned, now the issue is really on everybody's agenda. Maybe until now it was part of the agenda of some governments, of some parties. Now literally everybody, this is one of the top issues of their agendas. And by everybody I mean developed countries, literally everybody. So the conclusion from that is that we're now sort of in the beginning or in the middle of a global discussion on the internet that will not go away for a long time. It's hard to say for how long, but the issues are not going away. And as was already pointed out, they will be discussed again in 2013, 2014, and so on. at the various major events that are coming up. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of figuring out what's the best way to address those issues. I was thinking about the divisions that I noticed in Dubai, and we've already spoken about the 89 signatories of the treaty, and then the 55 who didn't sign, who some of them declared that they had a problem with the text, with the provisions of the text, and they will never sign the text in its current form. But there were other countries that simply declared that they needed more time and to consult with their capitals before they make a final decision as to whether to sign or not. And I think we have a lot of work to do with, well, the 89 countries, obviously, but also with those countries among the 55 who are still trying to figure out what this means for them, what is the best reaction to the treaty text, whether they will sign or not. Well, just again, thinking about those divisions, obviously, it was obvious to me that there were countries whose positions will probably never be able to change. And here, without mentioning specific names, I think it's fair to say that the authors of that so-called compromised version of the text that appeared on Friday of week first, the compromise text that was signed that was proposed by a few countries. So these are probably the countries that have specific positions for specific reasons, and those will never change. But then the vast majority of countries have some real issues that they need to have addressed before they can understand and agree with our approach to the way the internet should be governed. A lot of issues were already mentioned. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that are more on the positive side, because we tend to talk a lot about the negative in terms of what is in the treaty, but there were at least two positive aspects that I wanted to mention. So one issue going into the conference was we knew that there were efforts and push by certain parties to make ITU recommendations mandatory. So one of the positives coming out of Dubai is that the ITU recommendations or standards that are developed by the ITU remain voluntary. So that's a good thing. And another positive that I wanted to put out there, even though it will probably remain an issue as such in terms of being brought up elsewhere, is the issue of information on routing. So the good news is that language on that did not end up in the text, even though it was debated at length in Dubai. There are a number of governments who do want to have information on routing, and the issue here is, of course, again, censorship and content and so on. But this is just another issue we should keep in mind as something that will come up again. Spam was mentioned, security, cybersecurity, and the issue of access seems to be the big one here. And as far as access is concerned, obviously this issue is approached from a number of different perspectives, and it's becoming rather complex. So we probably need to structure it in a way that we know that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about access. So some people are talking about broadband deployment and availability and growth in broadband. Others are talking about peering and charging arrangements in terms of providing funds for investment that would lead to improved access again. And so we need to sort of structure those issues in a way that would allow us to address the real problems there and separate ourselves from from different agendas that exist in that context as well. And I see on the agenda that we'll talk later about how those issues. What is the best way to address those issues in the past? And I just wanted to say that for me personally, I see the IGF as the best forum to start to tackle those issues in depth and in detail, because it offers a format that is by design participatory, yes, sorry. And so I think it's the IGF that should address those issues. And I see on the agenda that we will talk about this in detail later, and I'll be happy to share some views on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Irvin. I'm going to turn to Seth, if I might. You know, one of the things that some of you may be aware of is that there was a very strong link between participation by the U.S. government and civil society, business, and the technical community from the U.S. in Baku. And many of the participants who were very active in Baku at the IGF were also then in Dubai and also participating. And Seth, if I might turn to you for some comments. Clearly, human rights was very much I would have said I was a bit surprised at the emergence of human rights during the treaty conference. Not shocked, but a bit surprised.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. This is Seth Bouvier from the Department of State, for those on the phone. Thanks for your efforts as a delegate and also as a general catalyst here. I think it's actually a testament to the IGF that we're here talking about the implications for the IGF and the fact that, all of the issues that just came up, that we think that the IGF, we're talking about them in the context of the IGF. The advantage of speaking sort of after a lot of illustrious colleagues is many points have been made, so I can be brief here. But what I was hoping to do is just underline a couple of observations about the wicket that I think are important to consider when we're planning out the IGF years ahead. Marilyn's helpfully already told me what they are just a moment ago. So the human rights conversations that took place and the role of civil society. Again, these are just emphasizing points that have already been made, so I'll be brief. I too, Marilyn, was a little bit surprised by how frequent and invested the conversations around human rights were. One of the strengths of the IGF, I think, is that the human rights conversations are always at the forefront, and whether we're talking about the regional or sort of the national IGF, that conversation is always taking place. But what struck me in Dubai was that the governments from around the world were actually had a strong appetite for this conversation and really wanted to engage each other around these discussions. And that's something that wouldn't necessarily be apparent if you just attend the IGF, where the conversations are more kind of around the activists and civil society. But it's the governments themselves are also very interested in this conversation. And it's not just Western countries that you may have guessed that would be the case. It's not just the Western countries. This really, every region in the world, they're very interested in talking about this. And so as we think about the IGF path forward, I think we need to kind of stay rooted in that rights-based discussion around governance issues. It's a real strength of the IGF, and we shouldn't forget that this is something that's really important and of interest to many people around the world. And then the second aspect here was the role that civil society played. Harold and others have touched on this at length, but I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the fact that this is, again, one of the key features of the IGF, and my bureau is committed to making it easier and more accessible for global civil society to attend the IGF. This is something that we put money into, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the strategy of who should be there and helping those who really are going to be critical voices down the road, and just wanted to encourage others to think about that and to devote as much as they can to making sure that this really is a global conversation and that the important voices are there and participating. I think we saw in Dubai how helpful those voices are and how critical they are in advancing the conversation and bringing their wisdom to the conversation. So I just wanted to emphasize those 2 points. And thanks again, Marilyn.
Thanks, Seth. And Paul, can I call on you to speak a little bit about the range of activities that ISOC is engaged in and your thoughts?
Thank you, Marilyn. So I'm multitasking here today with the webcast, so that's fine. That's good. Yeah, well, we're going to continue our work. Obviously, we had a group at the WCIT led by Sally Wentworth, Marcus Coomer, and Karen Mulberry. They're going to continue their work, and I would encourage you all to connect with them. I know right now they're in a idea collection mode. They're collecting different topics that they want to continue working on coming out of the WCIT. So I think that they are meeting and making plans. From the North American Bureau's perspective, I'm expecting to work very closely with the DC chapter to have events like they had an outstanding event just a couple of days ago that was featuring Ambassador Kramer. So we'll continue working with the DC chapter on this topic. I know they're very interested in it, as well as the other chapters around the country. So that's really all I have to add at the moment, but stay tuned for more. Doing the webcast is a big part of what we want to help do going forward too. So I suspect we'll be working with Maryland to make sure that these meetings are available online so we can have more participation from around the world.
Thank you, Paul. I'm gonna ask Dan O'Neill to say a couple of words, and then I've asked Clovis to talk a little bit about CITEL and about the uniqueness of CITEL as a partner and one that many of us might not fully appreciate. So let me go to Dan and then to Clovis.
Thanks, Marilyn. Again, Dan O'Neill with the GIIC. I was not a participant in Dubai, so my focus is more kind of on the role and activities that the GIIC and some of the business organizations have had in both the IGF, the IGF-USA, and then picking up on some of the comments of Ambassador Vavier, the importance of a focus on access and participation of the developing countries. The GIIC has been actively engaged in the IGF process from the start. We've hosted workshops at each and every one of the meetings. We will continue to do that. We found the IGF to be, with the focus on multi-stakeholder, a very, very good opportunity for the business community to engage in this, to hear from other stakeholders. The involvement of civil society has been very, very important there and very constructive. In addition to our engagement at the IGF, we also have a series of meetings focused on this concept of engagement and access. And what we have tried to do recently is focus more on participation in developing countries. Our last two workshops at the IGF have been heavily focused on impact in developing countries, trying to move in that direction, because as Phil said, I think that is something that is truly lacking and an area of focus that we desperately need. Next year, I do think the GIIC is going to have its annual meeting. Right now, we're looking at Hong Kong. So it's going to be an opportunity for us to do some outreach in the Asia-Pacific region. Again, I think it's important to get greater involvement there. I think we do have member companies in those areas, but there just needs to be across the board, greater participation. As Harold noted, I think Middle East and some of the former Russian states are an area of concern. We have done some work in the Middle East, and I think that absolutely is a place that we all need to focus, not just the business community, but to engage others and see if we can't increase participation. But as a member of the business community, I certainly want to lend a strong voice of support to the work that is done at the IGF. at the IGF-USA and think that it is a critical element for us all to do greater outreach and to really start to bridge some of these issues between, you know, North and South, developed and developing countries. And just lastly, again, picking up on what Harold said, I think this concept of a cultural issue and how to address some of those, you know, to raise those issues and start to tackle some of those is going to be critical, because while there are no shortage of technical issues, I think the cultural issues are very, very important as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike, you wanted to comment on that, and then we'll go to close.
A real quick question for Dan. You've worked with Asia for many, many years, and the GIIC has a lot of Asian members. I was curious how you see Japan, particularly, and also particularly Korea, doing more in this debate in the future. They've been engaged, and but they don't take a leadership role.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what you think, in their heart of hearts, they think the proper internet governance model will be, and I'd be specifically interested in how we might influence Korea, because they're going to host the plenipotentiary in 2 years.
Right.
The fact that the WCIT was in Dubai made a difference. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, yes, Asia is frustrating. You know, talking about a region, especially when you talk about North Asia, you know, the countries in North Asia and the importance of these issues to them, their limited participation is extremely frustrating. You know, I think at one point earlier on, the Japanese were more engaged. I think we've actually seen them kind of moving backwards over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, that tends to be on the kind of global scale. On a national scale, I was pleased to see that we have got the growth and the input from a Japanese, you know, IGF. So we are seeing, you know, kind of a re-engagement there, and the GIIC is involved in supporting that. We are also in conversations with Korea. Again, Mike, I think what I have found in Asia, and I think probably globally, is these meetings tend to serve as catalysts for increased engagement. So while we have not seen it to the level that we have, you know, we would have wanted, I think we are going to see some increased activity, and the GIIC is certainly doing outreach to try to engage that process. Now, just thirdly, one country that wasn't mentioned is we have seen an increased level of interest on the part of the Chinese in a lot of these things, where I don't think they were anywhere to be found, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. I think there have been some signs that, you know, they understand the importance of being at the table and want to be at the table. So, you know, we are going to continue to do outreach both in the north as well as down the ASEAN region, because I think there's some important work to be done there as well.
Yeah, the Chinese certainly have gotten more engaged in the ITF.
Yes.
But just specifically to Korea, what do they want from the plenipotentiary?
That's a good question. I mean, and I would be, you know,
speculating.
I would be speculating beyond where I'm comfortable speculating.
So let me point out that, and I'll come back to this, Korea will be hosting the cybersecurity event that was launched in 2010 by the UK and then hosted by Hungary in, 2011, hosted by Hungary in 2012, and Korea will be hosting it in October, and we'll come back and talk about that, because I think that I did meet with the Korean delegation and civil society and some academics while we were there, so we can come back maybe and talk about that. But I wanted Clovis to paint the picture of who CITEL is and why it is uniquely important to us.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Telecommunications Commission. CITEL, this is the Spanish acronym, and we are a telecommunications advisory body of the Organization of American States, the political organization of the Americas region, comprised by 34 member states. We are headquartered here in Washington, D.C., and I came from Brazil, where I have worked for Anatel, the regulatory agency. I was one of the founders of Anatel, and I was posted here 12 years ago. And I'm living here in this beautiful city, beautiful country with my family, very happy. So in regards to CITEL, one of our key responsibilities is to engage into a regional preparatory work for World Telecommunication Conferences of ITU, namely the World Radio Communications Conference, the World Telecommunication Development Conferences, the Plenipotentiary Conferences, and the World Telecommunications Standardization Assemblies as well. So WCIT was, the preparation of WCIT was on our mandates, and we were able to assemble 39 common Inter-American proposals and to present them as a package to the conference. I'm glad to say that most of them did go through in the conference, others don't. But I think that in terms of regional work, I think that it was a good input for the conference. We were able also to engage into several bilaterals during the WCIT, namely with the European Commission on Post and Telecommunications, with the African Telecommunications Union, with Asia-Pacific Telecommunity, having Mr. Araste as their spokesperson. It was very instructive working with them. And also with the Arab Group and the Eastern European RCC. So we have cooperation agreements established with all these organizations, and it was very important for us to work face-to-face with them. We learned a lot from them, and I think that we can keep working with all of them in a very positive way. So the outcome of WCIT could be a little bit frustrating for us as a regional body of the Americas due to the fracture that we had. 15 countries did sign the WCIT treaty, and 6 countries, including the US and Canada, didn't sign. So we have something to work in our region, and we are eager to work together with IGF. So I forgot to mention that CITEL is comprised by representatives of the 34 countries of the region, policymakers, regulatory agencies, telecommunication regulatory agencies. And we are also proud to indicate that we have more than 100 companies, private sector companies, working together with governments, and they are named, in our case, associate members of CITEL. We also welcome the participation of civil society representatives. So we are an open forum, and we welcome civil society representation in our work. And I'd like to mention that the internet and telecom ecosystem is well represented. And we have, for example, LACNIC is one of our associate members. We have the participation of ISOC and ICANN as observers. And we now welcome the participation of IGF in our activities. So I think that in terms of summarizing the work ahead we have before us, I think that we should promote a common understanding on key issues. I mean, one very sensitive issue for developing economies in our region, in particular Brazil, is the issue of international internet connectivity. And we have a work program on that. And also, I should mention broadband deployment and cybersecurity. And I'm glad to inform that our leader for that, our rapporteur for that is Oscar Messano from LACNIC. So he is the CITEL's rapporteur for internet resources. And under his leadership, we'll be progressing on those items. So I would finish with that, and I would welcome the participation of you all in CITEL. I'll be glad to assist you with that. I think that we need fresh air, new ideas, and how to better cope with this fracture that we had after Dubai. Thank you.
Thank you, Clovis. And Frank, I think you wanted to make a comment, and then I'm going to move us along.
Yeah, let me make a couple of comments. First is to build on what Dan O'Neill talked about, the IGF and its importance. I think we all ought to keep in mind that the IGF was an approach that was adopted after extensive negotiations in the WCIT context. In Tunis, the governments at the summit level made a decision that a way forward to have meaningful and comprehensive discussions about all aspects of Internet could be a multi-stakeholder forum, the IGF. It's really, there's been 7 meetings now. I think anyone who looks at the record of what has happened in the 7 years would have to say that the IGF has been successful. Not perfection, mind you, not answering everybody's questions, but an environment where all sectors of society, government, civil society, industry, private individuals, academia, come in on an equal footing and can have a full exchange of ideas. And ideas are what the heart and soul of the Internet experience is. So while we have had come back just from this discussion, treaty negotiations, I'd just like to underscore the primacy and the continuing importance of the private sector, the civil sector, governments in the IGF process. And this is a message we need to carry forward in the WCIT plus 10 discussions that will occur in a couple of years. And then finally, and very quickly, to build on also on what Clovis has said, to strengthen the cohesion, let me say, in Region 2, I think using the IGF mechanism can be very instrumental, can be a way of greater participation by private sectors, civil society. One of the realities of everything we've talked about virtually, what we like to do is constrained by resources, constrained by finances. That's a fact that exists with respect to CITEL itself. CITEL is a member of the Organization of American States, as Clovis has pointed out. Its budget is minimal, considering the scope and the importance of the work it has in telecommunications and the Internet environment. Everybody knows that has looked at this, that telecommunications is a multiplier, has a multiplier effect. It affects commerce and trade, finance, all aspects of society. So I think one of the things that we could try to give some thought to is how to elevate the importance of the telecommunications CITEL function within the OAS organization itself, to try to give more primacy, more priority, or a recognition of the importance of this sector. And here again, I think the IGF membership participants can be helpful. And one way to do that is for the private sector and civil society to talk to the governments that are members of the OAS to communicate and explain and make an appeal to give more priority to this function because of its overriding importance. One of the great beauties that no one can deny is that the Internet, its development, has been a great contributor to the growth and economic welfare in so many ways throughout the world. And that's a feature that I think we need to continue to emphasize. So if you have time, do whatever you can to try to strengthen the OAS activities in telecommunications, and also to strengthen participation in IGF generally and regionally. I'm sure there's a prominent role that in the hemisphere, in the Americas, that the IGF regional activities can make a sustaining, meaningful contribution. So I recognize I've probably been preaching to the choir a little bit. On the other hand, the points that I've made, while obvious, are important, and we shouldn't lose sight of the primary activity of IGF. Thank you.
Please, Clovis.
Thank you, Frank. Only another comment. We have 4 meetings of CITEL planned for 2014, actually 5. And in our agenda, we have a high priority for the preparatory work for the next Planned Potentiality Conference, besides following up the WCIT. So perhaps we could consider having meetings back-to-back. So in order to identify, to strengthen synergies between IGF and CITEL, I think this could be something that you could pursue.
I think that's an excellent idea. I'm just going to move us to talk now about the and I think what I'm going to do is talk first of all about the road ahead on this chart that you have. And I'm going to, Clovis, I'm going to put some, I'm going to put the CITEL meetings on the road ahead. When I started this chart, this timeline, it was 4 pages long. It began at the plenipotentiary in 2010, and I color-coded it. And to my amazement, it had the preparatory processes for the WCIT on it. And to my amazement, the little boxes of meetings, 50% of the color, when I color-coded it, was red. And red signifies the meetings that are hosted by the ITU. Purple is ICANN, and green are the IGF and UN-related issues. So the next time you see it, it will not be 2 pages, it'll be 3 pages because of the activities that need to go into this. But the reason I do this is I think it's important for us to understand that these topics, not just how should the internet be governed, but what are the solutions in critical issues such as spam? Are there technical solutions? Are there combinations of policy, regulatory, legal, and technical solutions that can help to address the very real questions that still exist? When we held the first IGF in Athens, and I will go back that far because, you know, we basically came out of the summit with a call for the Secretary General at the heads of state level to create a forum, and we literally threw the first forum together. We were very fortunate that Greece offered at the time to host. And I will just say to you guys that my observation is that the contributions made by governments and by business, civil society, and the technical community continue to diminish in number in terms of active participation in the public consultation process, which basically means you can submit a written comment. In 2006, 33 governments filed comments, 36 business entities, 36 civil society, 41 comments from the technical community, and 11 from individuals. And today, when you look at this chart that this timeline that I've laid out, we are lucky if we get 5 to 6 business entities filing comments, 5 to 6 civil society, and a handful of governments. So, and the technical community is always very well represented. So one thing I would say to all of us is we have to start taking the public comment process, which we can participate in virtually, much more seriously than we have been. and we have to start reading the comments that are filed by others so that we improve our understanding of the issues they're asking to have addressed in these fora. We will put the road ahead up on the IGF-USA website, and you'll be able to find the webcast both on the ISOC website, and we'll put a link on the IGF-USA.us website. But I had asked Andy if he would talk, Andy Reynolds, if he would talk a little bit about the CSTD, which is one of those friendly UN fora that may not be very well understood, but is absolutely critical to the follow-up for the WCIT, and is the place that we go to write the resolutions that then go to the UN General Assembly that have an impact on the IGF, including the continuation of the IGF. Andy.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. It's been a very interesting morning and most informative since I was not part of the WCIT, to have a real good insight, and especially the comments of civil society, to appreciate the deep observations they make about the areas for improvement. Just by way of referencing Marilyn's introduction, remember that the General Assembly exists, and beside it in parallel is the Economic and Social Council, under which the Commission on Science and Technology resides. And it has a rather semi-autonomous role to play as a scientific and technical advisor in the matters related not only to its traditional brief, which is how science, technology, and innovation inform and empower development, but also as a result of Tunis, a second mandate, which is to follow the process of Tunis implementation, the main action lines in Tunis, and the main action line implementation by UN organizations. And it has as an annual responsibility to draft a report to that end that goes to the ECOSOC and sometimes is empowered within a resolution. In the May meeting, it's important we have a cycle that has a session, a formal session at ministerial level every May, and we have an intersessional, which is a preparatory meeting halfway through the year. At the May meeting, the 15th session, we in the U.S. delegation, with many other allies, moved on a resolution that would have allowed the CSTD to continue working in the area of enhanced cooperation. And it was an important movement because in our coalition of support, we had engaged Brazil and India and others who previously had not been as sympathetic to using CSTD in this way. But in order to move ahead in a constructive way, we had proposed a resolution, and we were nearly successful in May, with the exception of 3 outliers, those being South Africa, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, who refused to bless that resolution. So we sent our normal resolution to ECOSOC, which reported on the general responsibilities of the Commission, but we took up the issue again in the United Nations General Assembly in the fall cycle. And a resolution, I'm pleased to say, resulted there, which kept the CSTD in its role as the multi-stakeholder first line, if you will, to consider the issues of IGF, of internet governance, and related activities. In short, we have a resolution which was blessed about 1 week ago that it invites from the General Assembly, it invites rather than directs the ECOSOC and the Commission on S&T for Development to continue its work in the enhanced cooperation question, and that includes the internet governance philosophy. We have a pragmatic approach, which would be a mapping process to discern really how enhanced collaboration is deciphered or defined. And from that, maybe a taxonomy which will show a greater need for certain clarification. And I will say in the resolution from UNGA, it also requests that we form a working group. Now, it invites and it requests, but we know from our allies that they would like very much to see a working group, a standing working group. We in the intersessional meeting, which is to be held in Lima the first week of January, will be discussing this issue and the activities that it implies for the CSTD. Also in the resolution was a paragraph that said we would hope that as the chairman of the CSTD goes forward with this request to perhaps consider forming a working group, that such a working group, if formed, would have balanced representation from governments, from the 5 regions, the UN divisions, the regional divisions, as well as membership equally from developing countries, representatives from civil society, from academia, and from industry, which is our normal charter. I will refresh everyone's memory that the CSTD had a similar working group running from about 3 years ago and delivering its report last May on improvements to the Internet Governance Forum. So in many ways, the CSTD is also working in close harmony and in parallel to protect the to preserve and to expand the role of the IGF. And in fact, the Commission was also counted as one in its own resolution recommending the extension of the IGF for 5 years, a year ago. So I would say the CSTD is our very constructive multi-stakeholder forum for the purposes of continuing the observation of implementation of TUNIS and the activities that are attendant to Internet governance in the broad perspective. I was very interested to see the signatories and non-signatories coming out of WCIT and to note that a number of our strong allies in that process, using CSTD as a multi-stakeholder organization, voted with us rather than against. And this is an important thing, I think, as we go through the regional division and understanding of who voted and who did not. It is a constructive way forward. And Chip, of course, made the point that industry has practical issues to attend to know who signed and did not, and so forth. And the point was the voluntary process that's before us. I would just say, as a general matter, and I think Clovis Baptista would be interested to know this, we are focusing on 2 themes in the CSTD in this annual cycle. And the first is science, technology, and innovation for sustainable cities and para-urban communities. And it's driven by the clear movement, the clear evolution to an urbanizing world. All continents, with the exception of Africa, which is moving quickly toward a 50% parity, if you will, have become urbanized societies. In Latin America, it's more than 80%. In North America, the same. Of course, densely populated Western Europe and Asia. And Africa soon coming. We picked up Africa by saying peri-urban communities because their cities are growing apace, and there is no infrastructure in many of these places. So you have a science, technology, engineering, innovation responsibility that the Commission provides vanguard information, case studies, and good practices. The second theme that we've been concentrating on is internet broadband for an inclusive digital society. And that continues a theme we started last year and engaged very deeply with the notion that closing the digital gap, the greatest digital gap that exists now, is a broadband access question. So it figures greatly into many of the comments here taken this morning, including an additional transparency and engagement in the IGF using modern technologies. So I'm pleased to say, for example, the Agency for International Development is deeply involved in this process with something called the Global Partnership, the Global Broadband Partnership, and engaged in Latin America now through the Cartagena Agreement, the Partnership for the Americas, which is deliberately moving with our friends in Latin America to increase access to broadband. And I would say that taken as a whole, we will be looking to our friends in this room and our allies in the previous experiences with the IGF working group to help us discern how to best balance the participation of the new working group on enhanced cooperation. We will be staging this process from the January meeting, and we will be going to a more formal resolution process in the 16th session at ministerial level in Geneva in May. And that will result, no doubt, in a resolution on science and technology for sustainable development, and it will also, as normal, have a resolution in hand for WCIS follow-on. I think the last thing I would say is that even in this resolution from UNGA, we had an article, a paragraph that appeals to our members that funding is, of course, very important to keep this process going. And that was an important observation in the resolution. So again, we come full circle and say that resources will be very tight, and there's never more important time to close ranks and make sure that we fund and we asset these activities as much as possible. I think that's probably enough.
I'm going to, it's Marilyn speaking, I'm going to just take us back to, there was a report from the CSTD Working Group on Improvements to the IGF that called for substantive changes and improvements, not to change the negotiating nature, but to add a significant value, including the idea of having outcome documents, or output documents, I should say. And one of the things that we'll be engaging in now at the IGF is how does the Secretariat go forward with making those improvements. I want to go back to something that Ambassador Vavier said and tie it to what I heard in the 2 weeks that I was in Dubai and met with many, many governments. I met with a large number of governments, both because I have interactions with them through ICANN work and also through the IGF, and a number of governments that I have met with when I attended the ITU Council Working Group on Internet public policy issues. My view on this is we must find a way to add pre-events that are tangible and substantive on some of these core issues. And we've already seen that Day Zero does have some existing activities and meetings at the IGF. And they've been very useful. Just this year in Azerbaijan, I participated with a MENA women's group that did a 2-day preparatory process so that the group of women coming from the MENA states, the Arab states, could be effective participants during the IGF. That was a very worthwhile experience, but I think added to that, we need to be working with FIRST and working with the technical community and putting together substantive sessions on spam, on cybersecurity, on dealing with some of these questions that the governments were asking for help with, and looking at the potential of a day for regulators on Day Zero. The regulators meet at the ITU-sponsored Global Symposium for Regulators, but the fact is that if they got an invitation to come to a day that was organized for them and they were able to meet with peers and others, we would see many of them continuing to participate in the IGF. On the panel that I spoke of, that I moderated for GIIC and WCIT in Azerbaijan, I had the chairman of the board of the regulatory authority of one of the African countries who has continued to work very closely. And I think we should be asking ourselves, what are these kinds of improvements that we could organize and instantiate? Most of the people who are involved in the IGF-USA actively participate in planning workshops for the IGF, and I'm going to, we'll organize a kickoff for IGF-USA planning in January, but I'm going to really challenge all of us to take the learning that we got, that we benefited from at the WCIT about the unaddressed issues that are about Internet governance, and think about how we embody changes and improvements to the IGF and what we do differently at the IGF-USA ourselves. Let me open this up for any comments that anyone wants to make, and then we will wrap up. I did tell Pablo when he arrived that I had a feeling we were going to have to perhaps reprise and update our scenarios, since some of the work that we did on scenarios in the past was very well received by some of the other IGFs. And just a point of information, in 2012, there were 11 regional IGFs and 17 national IGFs. And participation in those initiatives is another way that we can contribute, including helping to strengthen and broaden who comes to those particular sessions. As I mentioned to all of you, one of the governments actually changed they had a workshop on the WCIT and they changed their delegation. And I see two comments, one from Mike and one from Andy.
Just a real quick question. Is there a spreadsheet somewhere with all the previous national and regional IGFs and most importantly the dates and contacts?
Actually, there is. If you go to the website, intgovforum.org, but what I'll do is put some of that information up on the drop-down item on the IGF-USA. But that information, all of the national and regional IGF initiatives have to write reports. Otherwise, they don't get to participate in the roundtable at the following IGFs. So there are reports that are available from all of them. Access is a very high issue. You won't be surprised to know that access is a dominating issue in all of these sessions except for Eurodig and the Canadian and the American, the IGF-USA. Other issues, principles are an emerging issue. Human rights and cybersecurity. I think if I were to sort of summarize the key issues that continue to emerge. The African IGF initiatives and the Arab IGF have had a focus on explaining what ICANN is, what the regional internet registries do, what IPv6 is and why it matters. So a lot more technically oriented briefings tend to go on at those sessions than actually, I think, at the IGF-USA, Mike.
And that also has the upcoming dates of upcoming meetings, or is there a better place to go?
No, there is no single calendar. I am working with the staff to try to solicit, but most of the national and regional IGFs are like we are, and that is they put them together based on when they can, but there's a rough, when you look at when they held their session last year, it'll be roughly in that same time frame. Andy?
Yeah, just kind of an observation. Just kind of an observation based on some of the things that we had earlier. It sounds like there are two separate avenues for us. One is a more technical avenue, some of which could be done remotely, and where the, if you will, the gravitas of the speaker or of the presenter is a real draw and it's really important. And the other piece is the, if you will, the social or relationship-based piece. I think that is really important, especially if you're dealing with cultures in the Global South. Getting face-to-face with people is extremely important. It is clearly an area where we can do much more. And for those of us who work in some of these regions fairly frequently, getting us out in front of these audiences, trying to participate in the local and regional IGFs is a good thing. Show a little bit of love, try to gather some information, do some good listening. I think that that's extremely important. We really do have to advance on both of these two, in both of these two areas simultaneously. If we just do the technical, I think we're going to miss out on a lot of what our political goals long term, one of which probably the central one in the short term is to make sure that people really get and understand and embrace the multi-stakeholder model. We see it happening. We want to really be able to build it up more. The Nigerian example is a great one. All of Nigeria's neighbors need to absorb that. We need to be, and I think we can be helpful in that process. And I think that they have a real hunger to meet us. We just got to be out there in front of them.
Thank you. Let me thank those of you who participated remotely and all of you who joined us today. And stay tuned. If you did not, if you registered, then Jake has your email. We will be doing a launch of the IGF-USA planning session in January, and we'll invite all of you to be aware of that whenever we put that together. Let me thank you again for joining us. And I'd like to also again thank ISOC for the webcasting, and Diana, you and the Carnegie Endowment for hosting.
Thanks, Marilyn. How's it going, man?
Yes.